Chapter 20. Monster Density Increases. Drew learned the first real law of Manafall the same way he'd learned every other expensive lesson in his life. By watching the leak before it became a flood. Mina slept badly. That wasn't surprising. She had bruised ribs, a stitched-together side wound, and the kind of exhaustion that lived deeper than muscle. But the pocket slept badly with her in it. That was new. Drew sat at the break table with the clipboard UI hovering above it, watching the domain readout tick down 1 point at a time. Domain Mana, 2840. Then, a few minutes later, Domain Mana, 2740. Slow, not dramatic, but steady. Like a drip inside a wall you couldn't ignore once you knew it was there. The pocket's air had a faint tremor in it now, the way a jobsite trailer trembled when heavy equipment rolled too close. The studs along the half-framed brake area gave tiny creaks when Mina shifted on the cot. The caution tape at the edge of the site pad fluttered though there was no wind. Drew hated that sound, not because it was loud. Because it meant temporary. He'd built his whole adult life out of temporary fixes, temporary jobs, temporary promises that lasted until Friday, or the next late fee, or the next argument. He didn't want this place to be temporary. Mina opened her eyes without lifting her head. You've been staring at those numbers for 20 minutes. Drew looked over. You've been awake. EMT, she muttered. Half sleep is a professional skill. He leaned back in the metal chair, crowbar within easy reach. Pockets bleeding mana while you're in here. Mina took that in with an irritating amount of calm. So I'm expensive. You're alive, Drew said. She gave him a tired look. Those aren't always different things. The foreman clicked into being over the table, like a bad thought made visible. Comment romantic, now fix the leak. Mina looked at it, then at Drew. I'm still not used to the clipboard talking. You and me both, Drew said. She pushed herself upright a little, wincing at her ribs. What's outside? Drew felt for the door anchor with spatial sense. The city pressed against it like a fever through glass. Not one pressure, 100. Thin places, stress points, little wrong seams in the shape of the world. Maury, he said. That was the problem. Not one monster, not one anomaly, not one freak accident you could label and pretend was isolated. Maury. He checked on Kyle and Jenna first, because guilt had its own weight and he was already carrying enough. He stepped out into his apartment, crossed the hall, and knocked on 3D with the crowbar ready. Kyle answered after a long second, chain still on. He looked worse, pale, unshaven, eyes too wide. Jenna stood behind him with a knife in one hand and a saucepan in the other like she hadn't picked a lane yet. You okay? Drew asked. Kyle nodded too quickly. Yeah, we heard something downstairs. We stayed quiet. Good. Jenna swallowed. Did you get that medic safe? Drew hesitated, then nodded once. Jenna looked relieved enough to make him uncomfortable. Keep your door shut, he said. No lights at night if you can help it. If the hall sounds wrong, don't open for anybody. Kyle frowned. What does sounds wrong mean? Drew thought of clicking joints and wet sparks and the dead flat silence right before a lunge. You'll know. He left before they could ask more. Outside, the city smelled like hot metal and old rain and something new underneath. Ozone, pennies, the scent of electricity trying to remember what it used to be. He moved on foot. No point trusting engines. No point trusting traffic lights. No point trusting crowds. Spatial sense buzzed constantly now, not as a sharp warning, but as a low map behind his ribs. He felt the city's weak, seems the way another man might feel whether in old injuries. Alley mouths pulled at him. Storm drains hummed. Subway grates exhaled cold air that wasn't air. The first bleed he found was in a service alley behind a liquor store, not a portal, not a dramatic wound in space, Just a patch of air above a dumpster where reality looked thin, like hot pavement shimmer except vertical. The brick wall behind it bent subtly if you stared too long. Drew crouched behind the dumpster and watched. Nothing happened for almost 3 minutes. Then the shimmer thickened. A drop of blackness welled out of it, not liquid, not smoke, something in between, and hit the pavement with a wet hiss. The drop twitched. It unfolded into a gutter wisp. A second drop followed. Then a third. Drew's grip tightened on the crowbar. Not random, he thought. Pressure build, leak, spill. Like a bad gasket. The foreman's voice murmured in his skull. See it? Yeah. He waited anyway, counting under his breath. The shimmer thinned after the third wisp, then flattened back into ordinary bad alley air. 3 entities, one burst, then stop. Pattern. The wisps skittered off in different directions, like roaches leaving the wall. Drew came out of cover and killed them one by one, keeping it ugly and simple. Crowbar first, boot second, a small void spall only when one almost slipped under the dumpster and out of reach. The kills weren't hard. The useful part was the timing. Kill confirmed X3. Domain mana absorbed, +8. User mana absorbed, +3. He stood over the dissolving motes and felt the pocket pull them through him like a hidden intake fan. 3 in a burst. Alley pressure release. No randomness, not if you watched long enough. He spent the next few hours moving through 3 blocks like a man, checking a site for structural weak points. A laundromat loading bay where the air tasted like blood and nickels, 2 wisps every 10 minutes. A parking garage stairwell where cold draft came up from below, 1 aberrant rat, then nothing, then 2 more a quarter hour later. A subway entrance sealed with caution tape and bent steel barricades where spatial sense screamed hard enough to make his eyes water. He didn't go down there. Not yet. He stood at the top of the stairs and watched the darkness below breathe. The station lights were out. The ad panels were dead. Somewhere deep under the city, metal shrieked once like a train brake being dragged across bone. Then something climbed 3 steps into view and stopped. Rat-sized. Too many forelegs. Bone-white whiskers that moved like antennae. It sniffed, then retreated into the dark. Drew backed away from the subway mouth immediately. The foreman didn't argue. Smart, it said. That's new. By the time he got back to the pocket, his clipboard table had become a map station without asking permission. A city utility map lay across it. He hadn't brought one in. The pocket had made it. Or remembered one from some job Drew had done years ago and decided it was relevant. Mina was awake, propped against the cot, sorting bandages and painkillers into neat little rows with the kind of automatic competence that made Drew weirdly grateful. He dropped a bottle of water beside her and started marking the map with a carpenter's pencil. Hot zones, he said. Mina took a sip, meaning. Not random, he tapped the alley. Bleeds happen where the city already has voids, service spaces, stairwells, utility access, loading bays, places under grade, places between things. Mina leaned closer, face tightening as she shifted her ribs. The city's body cavities. Drew looked at her. She shrugged one shoulder. Sorry, medical brain. No, he nodded at the map. That. He marked the subway entrance darker than the rest. Pressure builds, he said. Then something leaks through. Small first, pests, scavengers. If the seam holds, it stops, if it does. He didn't finish it. He didn't need to. Mina studied the pattern. Transit routes, she said. That's where ambulances were getting weird calls even before everything broke. Underground stations, tunnels, underpasses, places radios got static for no reason. Drew felt a cold line down his back. Not no reason, he said. The foreman UI blinked over the map. Field note. Monster density correlates to spatial stress plus human infrastructure GAPS. Comment, congrats. You figured out water RUNS downhill. Mina stared at the text. So it uses our structures. Or our structures make it easier, Drew said. Either way, the answer tasted bad. The city had spent 100 years building veins and hollow spaces and transit arteries under itself. Now something else was using them. That night, Drew checked the hot zones again from the roof of his apartment building. From up there, he could see the city's pattern. Not the exact seams, not all of them, but enough. Sirens had mostly stopped. Power flickered block by block. Smoke drifted from somewhere south. And every so often, along an alley or stairwell or cracked subway mouth, he saw it. A faint blue-white shimmer near the ground. A bleed point. The city wasn't being invaded evenly. It was being infested along lines. Like mold, taking the damp places first. Drew stood there a long time with the crowbar in one hand and the wind tasting metallic on his tongue. Monster density, he thought. That meant distribution. Distribution meant pattern. Pattern meant work. And work, at least, was something he understood. When he went back down into the pocket, the domain was shivering again around Mina's sleeping form. The caution tape at the edge fluttered once more. Drew looked at the mana readout. Domain mana, 3140. Better. Not enough. He sat at the break table, stared at the map, and made the decision he'd known was coming. If the city had hotspots, then growth had hotspots too. And if he was going to keep Mina alive, if he was going to keep this place standing, then don't get caught in a bleed wasn't enough anymore. He was going to have to start reading the city like a job site. And then he was going to have to work it. Chapter 21, Void Spall Refined. Mina hated watching him throw up. Drew figured that out on day 2. Not because she said anything sentimental. Mina didn't seem built for sentimental. She looked at pain the way a mechanic looked at stripped bolts. Annoying, dangerous, worth solving fast. But every time Drew came back from a run pale and shaking after overspending Void Spall, her mouth flattened in the same irritated line. On the third time, after he leaned over the pocket's 5-gallon water bucket and dry heaved until his ribs hurt, she said, "You're using it wrong." Drew wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and glared at the concrete floor. Helpful. I'm serious. He sat back against one of the studs, breathing hard until the grey sky stopped tilting. Mina was on the cot, one hand braced against her side, the other holding the little clipboard UI had started treating like a real object. Sometime during the night, the pocket had given it paper. Or paper-shaped something. Either way, she'd filled it with notes in neat block handwriting. How am I using it wrong? Drew asked. Mina looked up from the page. You go for the biggest possible cut because you're scared. He started to object, then didn't. Because she wasn't wrong. When people panic, Mina said, they think in center mass, chest, head, biggest target. It works if you have enough force and enough room for error. She tapped the clipboard against her knee. You don't. The foreman materialized near her shoulder like it had been waiting to pile on. Comment, she's right, print this out. Drew let his head thunk softly against the stud. I know I don't have enough mana. It's more than that, Mina said. You're thinking like a guy swinging a sledgehammer. Your thing, she gestured vaguely with the clipboard, meaning Void Spall, the door, the whole impossible mess that isn't blunt force. That's surgery. Drew barked a short laugh. I'm not a surgeon. No, Mina said, which is why you need to stop improvising and start targeting. He looked at her. She held his gaze. You don't have to delete a whole body, she said. You just have to stop the part that's about to hurt you. The pocket went very quiet. Drew thought about the hound in the hallway, the bus aberration dragging itself with claws, the way smaller cuts had cost less and done enough. Mina kept going. People don't attack you with center mass, she said. Animals don't either. They attack with legs, jaws, claws, momentum. If it's human, it's hands, weapons, elbows. You remove the business end, the rest becomes a problem for later. The foreman made a pleased little noise. Oh, I like her. Drew stood up slowly, still a little shaky from mana drain. All right, he said, show me. Not with a person, Mina said dryly. No kidding. The pocket helped. Or maybe it was just reading him again. By the time Drew turned around, the sight pad had arranged itself into a training lane. A pair of sawhorses appeared near the far edge. Scrap metal lengths leaned against a stud wall. A torn work glove hung from a nail like an insult. He stared at the glove. The foreman UI blinked. Training environment updated. Comment, don't say I never built you anything. Mina smiled despite herself, then immediately looked annoyed that she'd done it. Drew set up targets the only way he knew how. A broom handle lashed to a stud at knee height, leg. A scrap pipe mounted on a hinge with the work glove tied around one end, hand. A cracked motorcycle helmet balanced on a bucket, head for comparison. He stepped back, breathed once, and lifted his hand. He didn't think void. That was the mistake. Every time he thought about the black itself, he got vertigo, the sense of leaning over a drop too wide for the mind to measure. So he thought like a tradesman. Cut line. Control. Minimum force required. He aimed at the broom handle first. Void Spall opened as a hair-thin slit. Clean, precise, no wasted width. The broom handle lost a 4-inch section and folded in on itself. His stomach flipped only a little. Mana, 1616, right arrow, 1516. Mina nodded, again. He aimed at the pipe hand target. This time he cut not through the arm, but exactly at the glove-wrapped end. The slit opened and vanished so fast he barely saw it. The glove dropped to the floor with the tied-off end of the pipe still inside it. Less nausea. Less cost. The foreman sounded smug. Would you look at that? He can learn. Drew ignored it and looked at the helmet. He'd aimed center mass before because it felt emotionally satisfying. Kill the whole problem. End it clean. But the helmet didn't need clean. It needed enough. He opened a slightly wider spall across the chin strap area instead of the middle. The strap vanished. The helmet toppled. Drew blinked. Mina tapped the clipboard. How do you feel? Fine. She raised an eyebrow. Less bad, he admitted. Good, again. So he did it again. And again. He trained until sweat ran down his neck and his fingertips buzzed with overuse. He trained until the work glove had been cut apart 6 different ways. He trained until his stomach knew the difference between a wasteful cut and a useful one. By the end of the hour, he'd learned 3 things. First, size mattered less than placement. Second, Void Spall liked lines more than chunks. The longer he could think of it as a blade instead of a hole, the cleaner it behaved. Third, panic made him expensive. The field test came that afternoon. Drew hit one of the alley bleed points he'd marked on the map just before the next burst. This one was behind a shuttered restaurant, where grease smell and mana smell mixed into something that made his tongue go numb. 2 gutter wisps spilled first. Then a new thing. It came out of the seam low and fast, rat-sized, but flattened wrong. Its front paws stretched long and thin like it had been pulled forward by its claws. Entity identified. Track rat, rank F. Threat low. Comment, City Edition. The track rat darted for Drew's ankle. Old Drew would have gone for center mass. Wide cut, heavy nausea, maybe a miss. Instead he waited until he felt the commitment in its movement, the specific line of the lunge through spatial sense. Then he opened a short slit across the front paw. Not the whole animal. The paw. The clawed part. The paw vanished at the wrist. The track rat hit the ground tumbling, momentum turned stupid. Drew stomped it once, hard, then pivoted and took a gutter wisp's lunge leg with another tiny cut before it reached his shin. The wisp crumpled against the wall like wet paper. 2 more strikes, 1 crowbar hit, 1 boot. Done. Kill confirmed X3. Mana absorbed, +3. Domain mana absorbed, +7. Drew stood still, breathing. No dry heaving. No world tilt. Just a hot, metallic pressure in his chest, and the thrill of having done a hard thing efficiently. That part bothered him more than the monsters. He made 2 more runs before dark. At the parking garage stairwell, he used a fingertip-thin spall to take an aberrant hound's rear knee instead of its neck. The thing collapsed mid-charge and slid into a concrete pillar hard enough to stun itself. 1 crowbar hit later, it dissolved. At a laundromat service door, a looter with a tire iron stepped out of the shadows too fast, panic all over him. "Back off," the man shouted. Drew froze. The man was thin, dirty, terrified. Not a warden, not a monster. Just a guy. Drew's hand rose anyway by reflex. Weapon hand, Mina had said. He saw it. The tire iron. The fingers around it. A neat, terrible little line he could cut. His stomach clenched. He didn't. He shifted the spall lower and cut the tire iron itself just above the man's grip. The top half of the tool vanished, leaving a shortened stub in the guy's hand. The man stared at it, then at Drew, horror wiping all aggression off his face. Drew backed away first. The man didn't follow. When Drew got back to the pocket, Mina was waiting with water and a look that wasn't quite approval. How'd it go? Drew sat at the break table and drank half the bottle in one pull. Better. Show me. He pulled up the logs. Mana efficiency improved. Void Spall control, +12%. Average cost per use, REDUCED. The foreman hovered between them, looking unbearably pleased. Comment, our boy SDOPPED swinging for the fences. Mina leaned back slowly on the cot. There you go. Drew stared at his own hand. The same hand that used to count rent coins on the table. The same hand that fixed pumps and loosened rusted bolts and carried things heavier than it should. Now it could cut the dangerous part off a charging monster with less effort than a bad day used to cost him. That thought sat weird in his chest. Don't make that face, the foreman said. What face? The one where you act guilty for getting better. Drew looked up. The UI had no real eyes, but somehow it still looked directly at him. You think power makes you bad, the foreman said. It doesn't, it just makes you harder to ignore. Mina glanced at Drew, then away. She didn't disagree. That night, Drew added a new note to the map on the break table. Don't kill the whole problem. Kill the part that moves first. He underlined it once. Then, below that, after a second's hesitation, he wrote something Mina had implied without saying. If it's human, go for the weapon. Not the man. The pocket was learning him. He was learning it back. And somewhere outside, beyond the door and the shimmering seams and the alleys that bled monsters in timed little bursts, someone else was learning the new rules too. He felt it in the city's pressure. Order was coming. Not safety. Order. and Drew had never trusted the people who showed up with order after a disaster. Chapter 22. The Wardens arrive. They came in trucks that shouldn't have run. That was Drew's first clue they were dangerous. Box trucks, 2 flatbeds, a city bus with its old transit logo painted over in matte grey. They rolled down the avenue at dawn in a tight conv, while half the block stood at windows and behind cracked blinds pretending not to stare. The engines sounded wrong. Too smooth. Not untouched by Manafall, nothing was untouched anymore, but stabilized, forced into consistency. Drew watched from the roof with the binoculars he'd found in a neighbor's abandoned closet and felt spatial sense twitch around the lead truck, like there was a person inside making machinery obey. The conv stopped at the elementary school 3 blocks over. Men and women got out in mixed uniforms, police plate carriers over utility jackets, EMT pants with body armor, high-vis vests over dark fatigues, hard helmets, riot helmets, work gloves. Salvaged professionalism, whatever still fit and still intimidated. On their sleeves, each one wore the same patch. A white shield on blue, split by a black vertical line like a door crack. Wardens stenciled underneath. The foreman's voice went flat. There it is. Mina climbed the last few roof stairs slower than she wanted to, one hand on her side, and squinted toward the schoolyard. You know them? Drew asked. Not personally. She took the binoculars when he handed them over, but I know the type. She watched the people below set up tables, roll out barricades, string caution tape, and unload crates with the efficiency of professionals who had skipped the panic stage and gone straight to command presence. One of them mounted a bullhorn to the hood of a truck. A woman's voice, calm and amplified, carried across the neighborhood. Attention! This district is now under Provisional Stabilization Authority. We are establishing a safe distribution point for water, medical aid, and registration. If you are injured, awakened, or sheltering additional civilians, report to the schoolyard for assessment. Drew's jaw tightened. Registration. Another voice came over the loudspeaker, male this time. All anomalous-capable persons are required to report for classification and safety review. This is for your protection and the protection of the district. Mina lowered the binoculars. That's new. No kidding. Below, people started coming out. Slowly at first, then faster when the wardens opened cases of bottled water like magicians producing proof. Families, old people, a guy with a bandaged leg hopping on a broom handle, 2 teenagers carrying a duffel together. Desperation loved a uniform. Drew kept watching. The wardens didn't just hand things out. They wrote names down, took head counts, tagged people with colored bands around their wrists. Blue for med needs. Yellow for dependents. Red for anomalous review. Drew saw that one because a teenage boy made a little spark dance between his fingers when a warden asked him to demonstrate. The nearby civilians gasped. The warden smiled warmly, put a red band on the kid's wrist, and walked him toward the grey bus. The kid went. Of course he went. Food, structure, adults who sounded like they knew things. Mina swore under her breath. Drew didn't ask why until she handed the binoculars back and said, "The warm smile's the trick." He watched a second red-banded woman get escorted toward the same bus. This one was older, maybe 40s, with a cut on her cheek and a flashlight in one hand that stayed on without flickering. Maybe they're actually helping, Drew said, though he heard how weak it sounded. Maybe, Mina said, and maybe they're building a monopoly. That landed in the same place as Drew's distrust of Cal, corporate, every boss who ever called exploitation team effort. On the street below, a warden patrol turned down Drew's block. 4 of them, uniforms cleaner up close, weapons mostly practical, batons, pistols, 1 shotgun, 1 man with a hooked metal staff that hummed faintly blue at the tip. Drew's spatial sense snagged on the staff immediately. Awakened tool. Or tech forced to behave by will. Either way, not good. Inside, Drew said. He and Mina went back down fast. Drew got her into the pocket before the patrol reached the 3rd floor. The domain shivered harder with her entering in a hurry, but held. Stay quiet, he said. Mina gave him a look that said she hated being parked like cargo, but nodded. The foreman UI blinked above the break table. Comment, hide your medic, hide your magic, very healthy start. Drew stepped back into his apartment, closed the pocket door, and shoved a pile of laundry in front of the exact section of wall where it had been. Not because that would fool anyone good. Because action kept his hands from shaking. The knock came 3 minutes later. Firm, official, not neighborly. Drew opened the door with the chain still on. The woman in front wore body armor over a dark utility jacket. Early 40s, maybe. Hair braided tight, no wasted motion in her posture. Her shield patch, said Warden. Her smile said she understood the value of appearing reasonable. Morning, she said. Lieutenant Vale, District Stabilization, you alone in there? Drew kept his face blank. Yeah. Vale's gaze flicked over his shoulder, taking in the apartment. Empty fridge magnets, cheap table, work boots near the wall. She missed nothing obvious. That was worse than swagger. You've heard the announcements. Hard not to. We're centralizing distribution and incident tracking. Need your name for the district list. Drew gave it. She wrote it on a paper clipboard. Paper, he noticed that. Smart. You injured? She asked. No. Observed any anomalies, spatial distortions, animal aggression, unusual individuals. Drew forced a shrug. Just the same stuff everyone's seeing. Vale watched him for half a beat too long. Drew recognized that look. Not suspicion yet. Sorting. Profession, she asked. Maintenance. One corner of her mouth twitched. Useful. Drew didn't say thank you. From farther down the hall came Kyle's voice through his chain door. Drew. Damn it. Vale's eyes shifted that way instantly. Kyle opened his door 3 inches too far. Jenna was behind him, face pale. This the guy? One of the wardens asked quietly. Kyle looked from the uniform to Drew and made the single worst choice available to a frightened civilian who wanted to be helpful. Yeah, he said. He's been keeping people calm. Drew wanted to throttle him. Vale's attention sharpened by a degree. That's so. Drew kept his expression flat. Means I told them to keep their door shut. Jenna mercifully caught the tension and stepped in fast. He checked on us, that's all. Vale nodded like she believed them, just enough. Good neighbor, she said. Her eyes lingered on Drew's forearm, where the healed hound bite had left a faint scar. You carrying? She asked. Drew held up the crowbar leaning by the door. This. Any firearms in the unit? No. Any medical stock, prescription meds, fuel? There it was. Not just aid. Collection. Some canned food, Drew said. Couple first aid supplies. Vale nodded toward the stairwell. We're consolidating critical resources at the school for fair distribution. There'll be requisition teams moving through later today. Cooperating early avoids confusion. Drew felt every muscle in his shoulders tighten. Fair distribution. The phrase hit his ears like corporate. Take now, promise later. He thought of Mina in the pocket, his antibiotics, the insulin pens, the water stacked against the stud wall. No problem, he lied. Vale smiled again, softer this time, more dangerous. If you notice anyone displaying unusual capability, report it. People are hurting themselves out there. We can help manage that. Drew thought of the red-banded kid led to the bus. "Sure," he said. The warden with the humming staff glanced once at Drew's apartment wall, exactly where the pocket door would be if it were visible. Drew's heart kicked hard enough to hurt. But the man moved on. The patrol continued down the hall. Drew shut his door, locked it, and stood still until the footsteps faded. Then he crossed into the pocket so fast he nearly tripped on the threshold. Mina was waiting by the break table. "How bad?" "They're organized," Drew said. "That's not what I asked." He looked at her. "Bad." The foreman floated between them. "Assessment. The Wardens have. Working vehicles. Supply chain intent. Classification protocol. Awakened acquisition priority. Comment, in other words, a boss." Mina leaned against the table and winced. "You're going to need more power." Drew laughed once, humorless. "That obvious. You have a hidden refuge and an ability they put a red band on in 2 seconds. She met his eyes. If they know you exist, you either become theirs or become a problem. He didn't like that she said it so cleanly, because he trusted clean truths more than pretty ones. "What are they collecting awakens for?" he asked. Mina looked at the floor for a second before answering. "Use, control, protection, pick one. It'll be all three." Outside, the loudspeaker rolled on. "Registration. Safety review. Requisition." The language of order settling over panic, like a tarp over broken machinery. By afternoon, the Wardens had a checkpoint at the intersection. By evening, they had 2 more patrols, a medic tent, a supply cage, and a line of civilians clutching ration cards like church pamphlets. Drew watched them from his window while eating cold peanut butter off a spoon. He saw a warden hand a woman water. He saw another take a case of canned food out of a man's arms for central stock. He saw a red-banded kid led into the bus and not come back out. Mina sat on the cot, sharpening a rescued kitchen knife on the bottom of a mug. "You still thinking maybe they're helping?" she asked without looking up. Drew watched the shield patch move under the streetlight. "Not for free," he said. The foreman sounded satisfied. "There he is." That night, Drew updated the map on the break table again. He marked the warden's schoolyard in blue. Not a monster bleed. A human one. Then he circled the subway entrance from yesterday in black and stared at it until the pencil point snapped. If the Wardens were building order, then he needed leverage. Food was temporary leverage. Supplies were temporary leverage. Power was not. For the first time, the thought came without flinching. He didn't just need to survive the hot zones anymore. He needed to work them. On purpose. Chapter 23, First Hunt for Growth. Drew started with a checklist because calling it a hunt made his skin crawl. Checklist sounded like work. Work sounded manageable. On the break table, beside Mina's neat stacks of gauze and the city map covered in marks, he wrote, crowbar, hatchet, 2 bottles water, electrolytes, bandages, headlamp, gloves, door anchor point, kill confirm absorb. He stared at that last line for a second, then underlined it. Mina read the list over his shoulder. "You're really doing this." Drew checked the edge on the hatchet with his thumb. Wardens showed up. "That's not an answer." "It is if you think about it." She did, her mouth tightened. The pocket had become more itself overnight. The site pad extended past the break area into a small open rectangle with marked lanes and a stack of salvaged pallets the domain had conjured because apparently Drew's subconscious thought a proper refuge needed somewhere to lean things badly. Still unstable, though, still shivering in the corners when outside mana pulsed too hard. Still temporary. Mina folded her arms carefully across her ribs. Then don't go sloppy. Drew snorted. That your pep talk? That's me being nice. She tapped the electrolyte packets. And drink these after, every time. I don't know if mana depletion is dehydration, glucose drop, or some third awful thing, but your body acts like you ran a marathon after the big cuts. He nodded. She kept going. And if you start getting tunnel vision, you come back. I don't care if the monster's half dead. Drew looked at her. Mina lifted one eyebrow. You want a medic in your weird construction afterlife. You follow treatment advice. The foreman chimed in. Comment, listen to the woman before I write you up. Drew took the map and picked his site. Not the school, too many eyes. Not the grocery back lot, too much crowd spill. Not the deep subway mouth he'd felt breathing yesterday. He chose the service entrance 2 blocks east of the old station, an access stair behind a locked gate, partly hidden by an overgrown hedge and a busted utility box. Below grade, strong pressure, lighter civilian traffic. A place city workers used to ignore until it flooded. Perfect. He went at dusk. The city was quieter now in the wrong way. Less screaming, more watchfulness. People had learned that noise attracted things, human and otherwise. Drew moved through alleys and side lots, hood up, crowbar tucked against his leg. Spatial sense led him the last 50 feet. The access stairwell felt like a deep bruise in space. The locked gate hung half open, chain cut. Inside, concrete steps went down into orange emergency lighting and damp air that smelled like rust, mold, and cold meat. Drew stopped at the top landing and made the pocket door in a janitor's closet just off the stairwell. Not open, just ready. An anchor point, retreat route. Then he descended. The first bleed was already active. Not a visible portal, just a shimmer hugging the floor near the drain channel at the base of the stairs. Something dripped out. A gutter wisp. Then another. Then one of the stretch-claw track rats. Drew exhaled slowly. All right, he murmured. The foreman's voice came quiet and clinical. Kill, confirm, absorb. The first wisp lunged. Drew took its lunge leg with a neat little spall and finished it with the crowbar before the body had fully stopped moving. The second tried to skitter past him up the stairs. He clipped the edge of it with the hatchet, turned it, then cut off the business end, one jagged more like protrusion, with another small slit. The track rat came low and fast. Drew let it commit, then took the front paw and followed with the heel of his boot. 3 kills. Fast. Controlled. The motes pulled toward him, then toward the hidden pocket anchor like filings toward a magnet. He felt the domain drinking. Kill confirmed X3. XPGANED 33. Domain mana absorbed, +9. User mana absorbed, +3. Not enough. Not close. But clean. The second burst came 12 minutes later. He timed it. Actually timed it, with the second hand on a busted maintenance wall clock that still worked because the world apparently enjoyed irony. 12 minutes. Pressure rise. Leak. Spill. This time 2 track rats and something bigger. It unfolded out of the shimmer in pieces. Long forelimbs first, then a narrow torso plated in concrete grey scabs, then a head too flat to be mammal, too wet-eyed to be insect. Entity identified. Drain crawler, rank E. Threat moderate. Comment, ugly little promotion. The drain crawler moved like a thing that had learned the city by following the undersides of it. It clung to the wall beside the stairs and launched sideways. Drew felt the line of the leap through spatial sense, a heartbeat before it happened. He didn't go center mass. He took the lead forelimb at the elbow. Void Spall flashed. The limb vanished from the joint down. The crawler hit the opposite wall badly, momentum ruined. Drew stepped in and buried the hatchet into the side of its neck plating. It shrieked like a pipe bursting under pressure. The sound brought the rats. One on his boot. One at his calf. Pain flared. Drew snapped a tiny cut through one rat's spine and brought the crowbar down on the other hard enough to numb his hands. The crawler tore itself free of the hatchet with a sick grinding noise and came again, one-sided but still vicious. Drew backed down 2 steps, lured it into the narrowest part of the stairwell, and waited until it reared high to strike. Then he cut the second forelimb. Not killing. Disassembly. The creature crashed chest first onto concrete, claws scraping uselessly. Drew finished it with 3 crowbar blows to the skull while it flailed. Then everything went still, except his breathing. Kill confirmed X3. Level up. Level 6. Stat points +2. Skill points +1. Mana absorbed. Domain mana absorbed +14. The warmth that hit him this time went deeper than earlier kills. It crawled into his legs, his shoulders, the grip in his hands. He stood there in the emergency orange glow and realized his breathing had already steadied. Not recovered. Steadied. Faster than it used to. He smiled before he could stop himself. The foreman caught it instantly. Oh no, he likes competence. Drew spat to the side and checked the numbers. Strength up 1. Endurance up 1. Simple. Reliable. He did another cycle. Then another. By the 4th burst, the stairwell floor was marked with hatchet dings and black scorch-like traces where spalls had opened and closed too close to concrete. His shoulders burned. His boots were dirty with non-blood residue that faded into mana mist when things died. He opened the pocket door twice during lulls and dragged remains closer to the threshold to improve the pull. Messy, practical, efficient. Kill confirm absorb. The phrase became rhythm. By the time he left the service stairwell, he'd hit level 7. He felt it on the walk back. The backpack of salvaged batteries and canned soup he'd grabbed from an abandoned transit kiosk felt lighter. The stairs to his 3rd-floor apartment took less out of him. His crowbar didn't drag his wrist down. The changes were measurable. Not fantasy measurable, real measurable. His body was becoming a better tool. That thought thrilled him. That part frightened him. Inside the pocket, Mina looked up from the cot as soon as he came through. "You're standing straighter," she said. Drew dropped the pack onto the pallets and sat hard at the break table. Killed enough things. That obvious. Yeah. He drank the electrolyte mix she shoved at him without complaint. Salty, chemical, foul, helpful. Mina watched him over the rim of her own water bottle. How many? Enough. Drew. He dragged a hand down his face. 3 bursts, maybe 9, 10 total, one bigger one. The clipboard UI blinked at his shoulder. Field loop confirmed. KLLS right arrow harvest allocate. Comment wow repetition. Who could have guessed? Mina studied him, and he looked at his hands. Feels measurable, he said quietly. Like I can tell what changed. He stood, almost on impulse, and picked up a full case of bottled water from the stack by the stud wall. Yesterday, it had been heavy. Now it was work. Real work, but work. Not strain. He lifted it one-handed, held it for a second, then set it down carefully. Mina saw the little flash in his face. Okay, she said, that's something. He nodded, then looked at the domain readout. Domain mana, 3940. Almost full. Close enough that the pocket's air felt charged, anticipatory. The caution tape at the edge had stopped fluttering and now held taut like it expected an order. Drew stared at the number. Mina followed his gaze. You got what you went for. Some of it. The foreman floated over the break table. Comment, don't ACT shy. You went out 2 level. Drew didn't deny it. That was new too. He'd gone out with a checklist and a route and a retreat point. He fought not because he was cornered, not because a monster jumped out of a hallway, not because somebody screamed first. He'd fought because growth was a resource, because power was leverage, because the Wardens had arrived in trucks that still ran and smiles, that cost people things. He sat back down and spent his skill point. Not on a flashy new trick. On refinement again. Void Spall control. Cost efficiency. Less waste. The UI chimed approval. Void Spall proficiency increased. Comment, he's finally stopping the bleed. Mina watched his face tighten briefly as the skill adjustment settled in. What you pick? Cheaper violence, Drew said. She huffed a laugh, then winced at her ribs. Outside, through the door anchor, he felt the subway pressure again. Stronger now. Not tonight. But soon. The city had more buried under it than he'd seen yet. And Drew, for the first time, wasn't just afraid of what he'd find there. He was ready to go looking. Chapter 24, Pocket Upgrade, Stability Frame. The pocket started shuddering in his sleep on the same night Drew hit level 8. He woke flat on his back on the cot, heart hammering, one hand already reaching for the crowbar. No monster. No intruder. Just the whole domain giving a low, deep groan like a building, settling too fast. The studs around the break area creaked. The caution tape snapped once in the still air. The grey sky above them rippled like wet cement struck from underneath. Mina pushed herself up on one elbow, eyes wide in the dark. That's new. Drew didn't answer because he could feel it. Not fear. Load. The pocket had gotten bigger in patches over the last few days. More organized, more real, more stocked. It was holding a wounded extra human, a table, a cot, pallets, water, food, medicine, tools, and Drew's increasingly complicated refusal to die. It had weight now, and no frame. He opened the domain panel with a thought. Domain. Rank E. Size 14mx 12mx 4m. Stability low under load. Domain mana 40/40. Upkeep elevated. Available upgrades. Storage racks. Rest area expansion. Site pad extension. Stability frame. Drew stared at the last line. The foreman appeared at shoulder height, somehow smug even as the domain trembled around them. There it is. Mina swung her feet carefully to the floor. I'm guessing that's the one. Yeah. He walked the perimeter first. He didn't need to. The answer was obvious. But he needed to feel it with his own hands. The boundary pressure bowed in and out in slow pulses. The door anchor throbbed like a stressed beam. The open area beyond the break zone, the rough little site pad the pocket had grown into, felt too wide in the wrong places and too thin in others. Like a slab poured without enough rebar. Drew put his palm on one of the studs and closed his eyes. For a second, he wasn't in a magic domain. He was on a half-finished construction site at 6 in the morning, boots muddy, breath steaming in cold air, looking at a framing job and immediately seeing what would rack in wind and what would hold. Load paths. Anchor points. Cross-bracing. Foundation before walls. The pocket listened. He felt it listening. Not like a pet. Like a tool waiting for instructions, from the only pair of hands it recognized. Drew opened the UI again and selected Stability Frame. The Confirm window appeared. Stability Frame. Establish primary structural logic for domain load support. Reduces drift, improves guest tolerance, decreases sleep cycle shudder. Cost 40 domain mana. Warning, user model will inform result. Comment, try not to build a fire hazard. He almost laughed. Almost. Then he hit confirm. The pocket exhaled. That was the only word for it. The whole domain took one long, impossible breath, and the grey sky above them darkened to the color of fresh concrete before a storm. Blue-white mana threads erupted from the floor in straight lines, snap lines, chalk marks, luminous layout guides racing across the slab. Mina swore and grabbed the cot frame to steady herself. Drew stayed standing. Not because he was brave. Because he knew this feeling. Not the magic of it. The sequence. Layout before paw. Mark before cut. The lines crossed, squared, locked. Then the slab split, not breaking, opening. Narrow channels appeared in the concrete, geometric and precise, and from them rose rebar cages woven out of blue-white light and dark metal memory. Anchor bolts formed at intervals along the perimeter, half spectral until they slammed into reality with heavy industrial certainty. Columns came next. Short at first, then full height. Steel uprights, I-beam clean, lifting from the floor and pinning the edges of the site pad to an actual load-bearing logic. The break area framed itself more completely around the cot. The studs thickened. Diagonal braces ran from corners to posts. A header formed over the freestanding pocket door, which now sat not in open air, but in a proper framed opening like someone had finally admitted doors deserved walls. Mina stared upward, eyes reflecting blue-white. "This is insane," she whispered. Drew could barely hear her. He was in it. The model. The feel. He moved instinctively, hand out, and the domain responded. A brace there. A tie-off there. Cross members along the open side. The pocket took his blue-collar brain and translated it into dimensional engineering without asking either of them if that made sense. The foreman sounded almost reverent under the sarcasm. "Don't stop now." Drew stepped into the open pad and pictured the one thing every bad site needed before anybody trusted it. A frame that could take load and keep taking it. He thought of warehouse mezzanines. Temporary shoring that became permanent because it worked. Concrete footings thick enough to make a future sit on top of them. The mana obeyed. At the far edge of the domain, where caution tape had once marked soft boundaries, low retaining walls rose knee-high from the slab. Not solid prison walls, Mori-like formed concrete edges around a site yard. Beyond them, the fog retreated several more feet, revealing a small open yard with packed grey ground and room enough for stacked supplies, maybe a workbench later, maybe a second cot if he dared. The whole pocket gave one last violent shudder. And held. Truly held. The groan died. The sky steadied. The pressure in the walls evened out from pulse to weight-bearing stillness. Drew stood in the middle of it, breathing hard as if he'd done the framing with his own hands. The readout updated. Upgrade complete. Stability frame online. Domain stability moderate. Guest load tolerance improved. Sleep cycle drift REDUCD. Size 16M x 14M x 4.5M. New feature small yard. The foreman floated beside one of the new steel columns and delivered the line like a boss walking a finished slab. Finally, a foundation. You'd be amazed what happens when you stop cutting corners. Drew laughed then. Not because it was funny. Because if he didn't laugh, Something more complicated was going to happen in his chest, and he had no time for that. Mina let go of the cot and stood slowly, testing the floor under her boots. "It's quieter," she said. It was. Not silent. The pocket was never fully silent. It had its own low hum now, like distant current through rebar. But quieter in the important way. Stable. Mina walked to the nearest column and touched it with her fingertips. The steel wasn't cold. It felt like compressed in tension. "You built this," she said. Drew looked around at the braces, the framed break room, the small yard, the proper doorway. "No," he said automatically. "The pocket did." Mina shook her head. "It used you." That landed in him deeper than he wanted. Because she wasn't talking about magic. She was talking about skill. He'd spent years fixing other people's systems, keeping buildings alive that he'd never own, making bad structures survive one more month for bosses who'd never remember his name. And now, for the first time in a long time, he'd built something that belonged to him. Something load-bearing. The foreman, as if sensing the dangerous direction of his thoughts, cut in. "Don't get misty. It's still a murder shed." Mina snorted. Drew shook his head, but he was smiling despite himself. The domain had changed more than just structurally. The break area felt less like a disaster cot in an empty slab and more like the corner of a site trailer somebody competent had started to set up. The table was sturdier. The pallet stack in the yard sat neatly now, squared on invisible marks. A tool rack appeared along one framed wall with hooks waiting to be filled. The pocket was becoming a place. Not home. He didn't trust that word yet. But place. Drew checked his personal status, while the feeling of the upgrade still hummed through him. User Drew HRKR. Level 8. SDR 8. End 9. AGI 6. Will 10. Per 7. Mana 1818. Skills. Pocket Domain, Rank E. Void Spall, Rank D. Spatial Sense, Rank F. Domain Reinforce, Rank F. He stared at the numbers, then at the domain stability, then at Mina leaning against a framed wall that hadn't existed 10 minutes ago. Part of him wanted to sit down for a week. The rest of him knew better. Because with the new frame in place, spatial sense reached farther. Not stronger. Farther. The pocket's stabilized logic gave him cleaner reads through the door anchor and into the city beyond, like reinforcing a building had somehow improved the antenna. And what he felt out, they made the back of his neck prickle. Below the streets, below the alleys and loading bays and little bleed points he'd been farming. Something deeper was gathering pressure. Not scattered. Localized. A bigger void under the city's ribs. Subway. He stepped out of the pocket for a moment and into his apartment just to confirm it. The hallway was still, too still. The Wardens, checkpoint lights flashed faint blue through the blinds from 3 blocks away. And under all of it, through concrete and tile and old pipes, Drew felt it. A pulse from beneath. Slow. Heavy. Not a leak. A build-up. He went back into the pocket and shut the door carefully. Mina saw his face and straightened. What? Drew looked at the map on the table, then at the subway entrance he'd circled in black. "It's getting worse underground," he said. The foreman floated over the marked station, like a foreman leaning over blueprints before a bad job. "Yeah," it said. "It is." Drew sat on the cot, and for the first time since Manafall began, the pocket didn't shudder under him. The frame held. The walls held. The little yard beyond the break area sat quiet and ready, waiting for whatever came next. Outside, the city kept learning how to break. Inside, Drew finally had a place sturdy enough to plan from. He lay back, fully clothed, crowbar within arm's reach. The new steel above him didn't creak. That alone felt like luxury. Just before sleep took him, spatial sense brushed the shape of the city again. Its alleys, its seams, its buried dark. The subway pressure rolled, once beneath everything. Not yet, it seemed to say. Soon. And for the first time in years, Drew drifted off not inside a life that was falling apart, but inside something he had actually braced to hold. Chapter 25, The First Dungeon, Subway Mouth. The subway opened its mouth at noon. Drew felt it before he saw it. The pressure came up through the apartment building's foundation and into the soles of his boots like a slow mechanical throb. Not the random little bleed point pulses he'd been tracking in alleys and stairwells. This was heavier. Deeper. A buried thing pushing its face against concrete until the city had to make room. He was in the pocket when it hit. Mina was sitting at the break table with his carpenter's pencil, making herself useful by turning one of his stolen legal pads into an actual patient log. She listed her pain levels, medication times, and the exact moment she'd started being able to stand without swearing. Drew respected that. He respected work. The whole domain gave a low, resonant tremor, not a shudder like before the stability frame, but a load-bearing hum, as if the new steel columns were taking strain they didn't love. Mina looked up immediately. That's outside. Yeah. Drew closed his eyes and used spatial sense through the door anchor. The city came to him in overlapping pressures, hot spots, thin seams, the ache of stressed space around transit lines and loading bays, but one point drowned out the rest. Southwest, below grade, familiar. Subway. The foreman UI blinked over the break table. Localized instance pressure spike detected. Comment, well, something down there just clocked in. Mina pushed the legal pad away. How bad? Drew looked at the city map he'd pinned to the break wall with finishing nails. The station he'd circled in black last night felt wrong even through paper. Bad enough to get attention. Monster attention or people attention. Drew thought about Wardens, ration lines, red wristbands, and any organized group learning there was a concentrated source of power under their feet. Both. He went to the roof again. That had become a habit too fast. Roofs were good for sight lines. Roofs were good for distance. Roofs let Drew pretend he was only observing a disaster instead of living inside it. From up there, 3 blocks away, the station entrance looked like somebody had driven a wedge into the street and pried it wider. The old subway stairs dropped below a concrete awning with rust-stained letters and busted ad panels. Drew had passed it 100 times before Manafall without seeing anything except grime and public neglect. Now the air above the stair mouth shimmered, blue-white in sheets. Not fog. Not light. A vertical wound in space, hugging the shape of the entrance. Wardens had gotten there first. Of course they had. Lieutenant Vale stood near the barricades in body armor and a utility jacket, bullhorn in one hand, papers in the other like she was prepared to bureaucracy the apocalypse into behaving. 2 trucks blocked the street. Orange barricades had been dragged into a rough perimeter. A half-dozen civilians hovered nearby despite every obvious reason not to. And along the rusted handrails of the subway stairs, blue-white droplets were forming. Drew narrowed his eyes. They looked like condensation at first, fat little beads of light gathering on metal. Then one detached, rolled up the rail against gravity, and dropped onto the top stair. It didn't splatter. It hardened. A glassy little bead the size of a marble, bright as a welding spark. A man in a stained mechanic's jacket darted under the first strand of caution tape before the nearest warden could grab him. Vale barked into the bullhorn. Stay back from the stairs. That area is unstable. The man ignored her, snatched the glowing bead, and held it up like proof God still did favors. For half a second, nothing happened. Then the dead flashlight, clipped to his belt, flickered on. Not bright. Not long. But long enough for everybody watching to see. The crowd changed shape instantly. Desperation did that. It reorganized people faster than any authority ever could. Mina had said it before, back when she was still half bleeding out on Drew's cot. Loot isn't gold, it's food. Now Drew watched that principle mutate in real time. That bead wasn't food. It was leverage. Power. Maybe warmth, maybe light, maybe battery, maybe worse. But it was clearly something, and the crowd around the station reacted to it the way starving people reacted to bread. A teenage boy in a school jacket vaulted the second barricade. A woman with a grocery tote shouted after him and then followed anyway, because apparently some forms of love were just badly disguised panic. A warden grabbed for the boy, missed, and the kid ran 3 steps down into the shimmering blue. Maury droplets glowed farther below. Like breadcrumbs. The foreman made a sour noise in Drew's skull. That's not bait at all. The mechanic with the flashlight bead saw them too and went deeper. The woman followed. The boy disappeared around the turn in the stairs. No one came back up. Vale's voice boomed over the block. All civilians away from the entrance, now. One of her people, hooked humming staff, same one from the apartment patrol, moved forward and stabbed the tip of his weapon into the shimmer over the stair mouth. The shimmer bit back. Not dramatically, no explosion, no movie nonsense. The blue-white film over the entrance snapped tight around the staff tip like stretched plastic. The man jerked hard, swore, and yanked it free. The last 6 inches of the humming hook were simply gone. Clean cut. The warden stared at the shortened staff like it had insulted his family. Drew felt his own Void Spall ache in recognition. Below the awning, deeper inside the station, something screamed. The sound came up the stairs, thin and metallic, like a person shouting through pipes. Then it cut off. The civilians nearest the barricade backed up. Not enough, Drew thought. Never enough. 2 wardens in improvised riot helmets moved toward the stairs with shotguns up. Vale said something sharp to them. They went anyway. Professionals. Or just people with a uniform-shaped death wish. They disappeared into the blue-white shimmer and down the stairs. Drew counted. 1 minute. 2. At 2.5, one of them came stumbling back into view, missing his helmet and half his sleeve, blood down one arm. He hit the top stair, looked at the daylight like he didn't believe in it anymore, and made it another 2 steps before something down below yanked him violently backward out of sight. The crowd broke. Screams, running, the kind of panicked shove and scramble that got more people hurt than whatever they were fleeing from. Wardens surged to hold the perimeter. Vale kept shouting into the bullhorn, but the street had stopped listening. Drew's UI flared. Instance, stabilizing. Environmental type, transit/below grade /contained. Common designation available, dungeon. User note. Drew stared at the floating text over the city scene, jaw tight. Then, because names mattered, and he trusted ugly accurate ones more than heroic ones, he thought. Subway mouth. The UI accepted immediately. User designation accepted, subway mouth. Rank E. Comment romantic. Drew watched the blue-white wound over the station entrance pulse once more. Murray droplets formed on the handrail. Even after the screaming, even after the dragged-back warden, even after the crowd had seen exactly what waiting downstairs looked like. A man in a hoodie at the far edge of the block stared at the next glowing bead and took one hungry step forward before his friend physically dragged him back. Drew understood the urge. That was the worst part. Not greed. Not stupidity. Need. A power source in a dead city was food, heat, medicine, bargaining chip, maybe survival itself. If the world ended poor, shiny things stopped being luxuries and started being arguments. He went back down before Vale could look up and clock him on the roof. Inside the pocket, Mina was standing by the break table despite every reason not to be. One hand braced on a framed wall, the other pressed to her bandaged side. "How bad?" she asked again. Drew set the binoculars down on the table harder than he meant to. Bad enough people are already dying for loot. Mina's face stayed still, which somehow made it worse. Loot. Glowing drops. Condensed mana, maybe. One turned on a dead flashlight. He dragged the city map closer and jabbed the station. Wardens are trying to hold it. Civilians are still going in. Mina stared at the map. Then it's resource-bearing. Drew looked at her. She met his eyes. Hospitals run on generators. Clinics run on refrigeration. Water plants run on pumps. If people just saw something that makes dead equipment twitch, she shook her head once. Yeah, they'll keep going in. The foreman floated above the map, like a smug site supervisor leaning over blueprints. Factory reset for civilization. If item equals, maybe power. Then human equals mine. Comment shocking. Drew circled the station harder, until the pencil point almost tore the paper. Mina watched him. "You're thinking about it." "No. You are." Drew exhaled through his nose. "I'm thinking if Wardens get a dungeon under their checkpoint, they stop being neighborhood bullies and start being a government." Mina didn't argue, because she knew he was right. He thought of the red-banded kid led toward the bus in Chapter 22. He thought of Vale's smile. He thought of Mina on his cot and the domain upkeep rising every hour she stayed alive. Then he thought of the station stairs, shining like a throat full of bait. "Don't," Mina said quietly. Drew looked up. She shifted, winced, and kept going anyway. Not blind, not because shiny things dropped and some idiots ran after them. That's how medics end up in collapsed buildings. He almost laughed. Collapsed buildings, I understand. That's worse. Maybe. Maybe not. Drew looked at the map again, at the service access he'd been using to farm monsters in Chapter 23, 2 blocks east, lower civilian traffic, maintenance gate, a route under the station, but not through the barricaded front. His route. His kind of entrance. Not crowd-facing, not heroic, functional. The foreman saw it happen in his head and sounded delighted. "Oh, there he is." Mina followed his gaze to the penciled mark. Drew. He said it before he'd fully decided to, which usually meant the decision had already happened somewhere lower than thought. "I'm going in." Mina closed her eyes once. Not dramatic, not pleading. Just a medic hearing a patient describe the exact stupid thing he was about to do. When she opened them again, they were sharp. Then you don't do it like a scavenger. Drew looked at her. Mina limped to the break table, pulled the legal pad back in front of her, and flipped to a clean page. "Tell me everything you know about confined space entry," she said. Drew blinked. Then, despite everything, some grim little part of him almost smiled. Because if there was one language he understood better than fear, it was procedure. Chapter 26, Tradesman Courage. Mina made him earn the stupidity with a checklist. Drew wrote it standing at the break table, while the pocket's new steel frame hummed faintly overhead, and the foreman offered commentary, like a foreman who had finally found a trainee worth insulting. Crowbar. Hatchet. Headlamp. Chem lights. Jog. Carpenter's pencil. 2 bottles water. Electrolytes. bandages, painkillers, snacks, gloves, bolt cutters, pocket anchor, turn back point, 30% mana, turn back point, severe nausea, turn back point, leg injury/hand injury. Mina took the pencil from him and added one more line in neat EMT block print. Tell someone your route. Drew looked at it, then at her. She met his eyes without flinching. That's me. Congratulations. You have a dispatcher now. The foreman UI blinked over the page. Comment: this is the UGLISD OSHA form I've ever seen. Drew tucked the pad onto the break table and started loading gear. He didn't think of courage the way movies thought of courage. Movies thought courage was charging the thing with a clean jawline and swelling music. Dangerous work never looked like that in real life. Dangerous work looked like harness checks and gas monitors, and a guy writing down how many people were entering a hole in the ground so somebody could count bodies right later if it went bad. Courage wasn't not scared. Courage was managed risk. Courage was knowing a job could kill you and still insisting on a better plan than hope. Mina watched him cinch the backpack straps. Say your route. Drew sighed. Service entrance east side, maintenance stair, anchor in closet at the top landing, clear upper concourse, no deeper if the pressure's wrong. Turn back. Mana under 30%, hand numbness, heavy bleed if the station starts folding. Mina nodded once, symptoms of shock. Tunnel hearing, cold hands, dumb ideas. That got the smallest twitch out of her mouth. Good, she said, and if you start seeing or hearing things. Drew thought of the platform announcements he hadn't heard yet, but somehow already expected. Depends if they're trying to bite me. Drew. He adjusted the crowbar on the pack. I turn around. Good. The foreman made a dismissive noise. Tender, disgusting. Drew went at dusk. The Wardens still held the main station block. He could feel that even from a street over, concentrated bodies, awakened tools, nervous authority. He avoided it all. He cut through alleys, past a laundromat with its windows blacked out from the inside, past a parking garage that breathed cold through cracked concrete, until he reached the maintenance gate behind the old service stair. The chain on the gate had already been cut from his earlier hunts. He eased it open and slipped through. Spatial sense flared the moment he stepped onto the stair landing. The whole access route felt different now. No longer just a stressed tunnel. Now it had coherence. Pressure along the walls, density under the floor, the clean, wrong logic of a sealed environment that had stopped being part of the city and become its own thing. The UI surfaced at the edge of his vision. Localized instance entry. Subway mouth, rank E. Warning, dungeon, IULES apply. Comment, don't ask what that means. You'll find out. Drew made the pocket door in the janitor's closet off the top landing, set the anchor by habit, and closed it again. Exit route established. Then he went down. The emergency lights in the service stair were dead. The headlamp on his forehead flickered weakly when he clicked it on, then steadied once he pushed a little will into the idea of light works. Mana ticked down by 1. He shut the lamp off again and used a chem light instead. Honest chemistry, less negotiation. The glow stick painted the stairwell a sick green. It was enough. Blue-white droplets clung to the handrail here too, though fewer than at the main entrance. Drew stopped at the third landing and crouched over one. Up close, it looked less like light and more like compressed liquid glass. A thick bead with slow movement trapped inside it, like the drop had a current. He touched it with the tip of his crowbar. Nothing. He touched it with a gloved fingertip. Cold shot through the glove, not painful, just deep. The UI chimed. Item detected. Condensed mana drop, low grade. Use, fuel/trade/absorption. Stability, fair. Comment, C, shiny. Drew stared at it for half a beat, then peeled it carefully off the rail and stored it. The crowd at the main entrance hadn't been wrong. Just stupid about timing. He found 3 more before he hit the concourse. The station had always been ugly in a public infrastructure way. Beige tile, peeling ads, stainless steel handrails with fingerprints no cleaner ever fully defeated. Now it looked like public infrastructure with a fever. Blue-white light pulsed behind cracked ad panels, even though there was no power. Old route maps on the walls bled their colored lines downward like wet paint. Ticket kiosks displayed dead black screens that still reflected movement, a fraction of a second late. Drew marked his path in chalk anyway. Arrow on the tile wall. Arrow on a steel support. Old habits against new reality. The first track rat came out from under a shattered vending machine, stretched claws clicking on tile. Drew let it commit and took the front paw with a fingertip-thin spall. The rat cartwheeled. 1 crowbar hit finished it. Kill confirmed. XP GAINED, 11. Domain mana absorbed, +4. User mana absorbed, +1. Inside the dungeon, the pull felt stronger. The pocket drank greedily through the anchor, like a hose under good pressure. Drew moved deeper. A second rat, then 2 wisps leaking from a closed ticket booth like smoke pushed through vents. Then a third thing he didn't have a name for at first, something small and black that unfolded out of the turnstile housing with too many jointed feelers and a mouth where the old ticket slot had been. The UI handled the namming for him. Entity identified. Ticket might, rank F. Threat low. Comment, public transit edition. The ticket might tried to latch onto his boot and start chewing. Drew buried the hatchet through its shell and wrenched it free with a grimace. The lesser fights stayed quick because he kept them ugly and practical. Break the moving part. Finish with steel. Use Void Spall only where it saved more risk than it cost. The station helped, in its own broken way. Everything down here telegraphed through infrastructure. The tile held vibrations. The rail bed hummed before something climbed out. Even the ads flickering wrong gave him tells, their lights smearing toward movement just before the movement happened. Spatial sense and tradesman instinct stacked on top of each other until the place began to feel readable. Not safe. Readable. That mattered. He found the first abandoned backpack at the base of the escalator. Cheap nylon, 1 strap snapped, a water bottle in the side pocket, no owner. Then a single sneaker near the platform stairs. Drew stopped looking too closely after that. The foreman, for once, didn't joke. The station announcement system crackled overhead with no speakers working. St. NCL, it rasped. Then static. Then, a few seconds later, the same voice from the opposite direction. CL, Sing D, Oz. Drew's shoulders tightened. Mina had told him not to ignore symptoms if the place started talking. He told himself that didn't count. The system had speakers. The speakers were just wrong. He knew it was a lie while he was thinking it. He marked another chalk arrow and reached the platform access corridor. The pressure changed immediately. Not stronger. Organized. The same way a machine room felt different from a hallway because something central was operating there. Blue-white light breathed up from the platform below in slow pulses. The rails hummed. Far down the tunnel, something metal scraped metal in a measured rhythm. Drew crouched at the top of the platform stairs and listened. 1 scrape. Pause. Second scrape. Longer pause. Then a 2-note chime from the dead station speakers. Ding! Dong! Something answered, with a dragging impact, heavy enough to shake dust off the wall. The UI flared red. Major threat detected. Comment, there's your foreman. Drew eased down one more step and finally saw the platform. The station opened up in front of him. Twin tracks, concrete pillars, benches bolted to tile, dead train cars sitting in the dark like sealed coffins. And at the far end of the platform, half in the tunnel mouth and half under the dead station light, something big rose up from beside the rails. It dragged one side of itself, with a sound like torn cable, through gravel. Its silhouette was wrong before it was visible. Too many projecting edges. Humanish in the way a forklift is horsish. It turned toward the stairs. Blue-white light ran through it in joints and gaps. The two-note station chime sounded again. Ding! Dong! The thing began to move. Drew's grip tightened on the crowbar. Every dungeon, he thought, needed something at the bottom that explained the rest. Then the platform butcher came into full view, and explanation stopped being the useful part. Chapter 27, Boss, the Platform Butcher. The platform butcher looked like the station had tried to build itself a killer out of whatever commuters left behind. Its torso was broad and roughly human in shape, but only if you were willing to insult both humans and shapes. Bench slats plated one shoulder. Snapped turnstile arms ribbed its chest. Bone-white arcs jutted between metal components like someone had laminated skeleton into public transit. Its left arm ended in a hooked nest of stainless grab bars, each curve sharpened into a catching blade. Its right ended in a fan of train door steel, flat, cleaver-like, the edges ground bright by use. Below the waist there were no legs, not really. A rail bogie assembly and cable-slung frame dragged under it like a lower body improvised by a machine shop with murder on the schedule. It rode the edge between platform and track, sometimes gliding on hidden wheels, sometimes hauling itself up with the hook arm and letting the rest of its mass grind after. Blue-white light pulsed through its joints. Where a face should have been sat a cracked station clock half buried in metal. The hands spun erratically over black glass, then stopped when it looked at Drew. Entity identified. Platform butcher, rank E. Threat high. Comment, yeah, that's a boss. The two-note chime rang again. Ding. Dong. The butcher came at him. Not fast. Fast enough. It hooked one arm around a platform pillar, levered its bulk sideways, and the door blade arm came across in a flat killing sweep that would have taken Drew at chest height if he'd frozen. He didn't. Spatial sense screamed just before motion, and Drew dropped to one knee. Steel sang over his head. The blade carved a crescent through the tiled wall behind him, showering dust and fragments. Drew rolled left, came up inside the arc, and slammed the crowbar into the joint where the hook arm met the shoulder. The hit rang like striking a handrail post. The butcher barely noticed. Its clock face head snapped toward him. One hand on the clock spun wildly. The hook arm reversed direction with ugly, efficient force. Drew jerked back, but not fast enough. One smaller hook caught the strap of his backpack and yanked him off balance. He hit tile hard, breath punching out. The foreman barked in his skull. Count it. Ding. Dong. As the station chime sounded again, Drew saw it. Not magic. Mechanics. The butcher's attacks weren't random, they were sequenced. First note, coil tension through the cable frame. Second note, committed movement. Then a half-second reset, while the bogie assembly and upper torso lined back up. 1-2 pause. Machine rhythm. Drew knew machine rhythm. He cut a lot of his life around it. The butcher lunged, with the hook arm again. Ding, shoulder load. Dong, sweep. Pause. Drew opened Void Spall across the elbow bundle. A thin black slit kissed the stainless hooks at the joint, shaving away 2 curved tines and part of the pivot bracket. The hook arm stuttered. The cost hit him, sharp nausea, a brief vertigo wobble, but the cut was worth it. The butcher's return swing went wide and dug sparks out of a pillar. Drew got to his feet and ran. Not away. Across. He cut down the platform diagonally, using benches and columns as cover while the butcher hauled after him, chime by chime, slash by slash. Ding. Dong. Hook. Ding. Dong. Blade. Pause. There. That pause was the opening. Not enough to kill it. Enough to dismantle. The first time he tried the lower assembly, he nearly lost the lesson. He opened a spall too low, aiming for one of the thick support cables suspending the bogey mass under the torso. The slit took half the cable and bit deeper into the wrong geometry underneath. The world inside the cut felt wider than it should have. Drew's stomach lurched so hard he stumbled into a bench. The butcher was on him instantly. The door blade arm came down in a vertical chop. Drew threw the crowbar up in both hands. Steel met steel with a hammering impact that sent pain up his wrists and dropped him to one heel. The blade kept coming. Slowly. Heavy as machinery. Not a sword. A press. Drew snarled, pushed back, and used a tiny spall at the butcher's wrist pivot instead of the main blade. The joint vanished in a neat black bite. The door blade arm dropped 6 inches offline. That was enough. Drew twisted, let the crowbar slide, and came out from under the chop with his shoulder burning and his breath shredded. He hit the butcher's chest with the hatchet on the pass. The blade sank between turnstile ribs and bounced out, leaving a pulse of blue-white light under the broken plating. Core, he thought. Maybe not the only one. But something important lived behind the chest. The foreman saw the same thing. Nice, cut your way to peril. The butcher backed up with startling intelligence. Not fear. Reassessment. Its clock-face head twitched. The spinning hands froze again. The hook arm flexed around the damaged joint, testing range. Then the station announcement crackled overhead. St. End CL.R. The butcher reared. Every cable in its lower frame went taut. Drew's spatial sense went white-hot. Charge. He dove behind a pillar a split second before the butcher launched itself down the platform on the bogey assembly, wheels screaming against tile and rail lip. It hit the pillar broadside hard enough to crack concrete. Dust exploded outward. The pillar held. Barely. The butcher did not stop moving. Its hook arms snapped around the pillar. The blade arm came through the dust at head height, blind but lethal. Drew ducked under it, inside again, counting because counting was structure, and structure kept panic from becoming death. 1-2 pause. Spall. He took another shoulder bracket. One of the bench slat plates hanging off the butcher's upper back sheared away and clanged across the platform. The boss shrieked, metal on metal, train brakes dragged over bone and jerked backward. Drew retreated before it could trap him against the pillar. They circled like that for what might have been 3 minutes or 15. Dungeon time had its own rude sense of proportion. Drew learned with bruises. The butcher's hook arm could catch and pin. The blade arm preferred committed finishing arcs, ugly to block, easier to bait. The bogey lower body hated lateral instability. If he made it turn too sharply, the upper torso exposed a seam at the waist where cable bundles flexed under load. That seam mattered. He learned something else too. The butcher got faster when the station chime came from both speaker banks at once. Dungeon mechanics. No point resenting them, only learning them. By the time Drew reached the midpoint of the platform, his left shoulder was numb from a glancing hook hit, his thighs burned, and his mana was low enough for the UI to start being annoying about it. Mana 720. Warning, you are not made of extra. The butcher was damaged, but not enough. It needed a failure cascade. That was how big systems died. Not one hard hit. 3 or 4 small breaks in the right places until the load path stopped making sense. Drew backed toward the track access ladder near the far tunnel end and let the butcher think it had him cornered. The boss came on steady now, one hook shortened, blade arm still ugly, chest core pulsing brighter through the cracks the hatchet had opened. Ding! Dong! Hook sweep. Drew let it miss by inches. Ding! Dong! Blade chop. He sidestepped instead of ducking, forcing the bogey mass to over-rotate. Pause. Spall 1. The black slit opened across the upper waist cable bundle. 3 thick cables vanished. The torso dropped an inch on one side. The butcher shrieked. Ding, panic load. Dong, wild hook lunge. Drew took the risk and went forward instead of back. Spall 2. A tiny cut through the remaining blade wrist pivot. The door blade arm detached at the joint and clanged across the platform, still twitching. The butcher hit him anyway with the bulk of the ruined limb, throwing him against the edge warning strip near the tracks. Pain exploded in his ribs. He tasted blood. The clock face head lunged down at him, not with teeth, but with a nest of wire and steel prongs punching forward from inside the cracked glass like an improvised feeding mechanism. Drew's vision narrowed. Not enough time for a big cut. Enough time for one right one. He jammed the crowbar up under the broken chest, plating with both hands, and levered. The turnstile rib cage spread just wide enough. Blue-white light flared inside. A knot. A condensed, hammering core of mana and stolen structure. The foreman's voice went almost reverent. There. The butcher drove him back toward the tracks, trying to crush him under its upper mass. Drew held the crowbar wedge with one hand, put the other against the exposed core space, and thought not about void, not about blackness, not about falling. He thought about cutting a bad bolt flush when there was no room to work. A short line. A precise line. A line that ended the problem. Void Spall opened inside the butcher's chest. Small. Perfect. The blue-white core disappeared. For a heartbeat, the entire boss froze. The spinning clock hands stopped at exactly 12:00. Then the platform butcher came apart. Not explosively. Systemically. The upper torso lost meaning first. Cable tensions snapped. Hook arms slumped. Bench slats, turnstile ribs, and bone-white arcs sagged inward as if they had only been pretending to agree on shape. Then the bogey assembly beneath gave up and crashed sideways into the track bed, dragging the rest with it. Blue-white light blew out through every seam. The station speakers screamed feedback. The platform lights went white. The UI detonated across Drew's vision. Boss kill confirmed. Platform butcher, rank E. XP GAINED, 184. Dungeon clear condition met. Domain mana absorbed, +41. User mana absorbed, +9. Level up. Level up. The wave hit him before he could stand. Mana surged through his body so hard it felt like swallowing live current. His arms locked, his spine arched. Every joint in him flashed hot, then cold, then hot again. The platform lurched under his boots. Not because of an earthquake. Because the dungeon had started breathing out. Or the pocket had started breathing in. Either way, the world under the city inhaled. And Drew, still gripping the crowbar jammed into a dead monster's chest cavity, realized the fight was not actually over. Chapter 28, Pocket Absorption Spike. The first sign was the wind. There shouldn't have been wind on a dead subway platform. No trains were running. No ventilation fans should have been working. The station had been sealed into dungeon logic the moment the subway mouth stabilized. But after the butcher died, air rushed toward Drew from every direction at once. Not air, really. Pressure. Mana. Blue-white threads tore out of the boss remains in long, luminous streamers and converged on him hard enough to pull at his clothes. The condensed mana drops scattered across the platform by the boss fight trembled, lifted, and started skittering over tile toward the same hungry center. Toward him. Toward the anchor. Toward the pocket. Drew ripped the crowbar free and staggered back, half blind with system text. Absorption event. Domain capacity, spike detected. Overflow imminent. Comment, OH, you did it now. The station lights blew one by one. Add panels burst into white static. The two-note chime played continuously, no pause between notes, until it became a single shrill electronic scream. Drew bent over and vomited onto the platform warning strip. Void sickness. Mana shock. Maybe both. He wiped his mouth with the back of one glove and forced himself upright. The pocket door. He needed the pocket door now. He felt for the anchor through spatial sense and almost fell over from the strength of the return pull. The door wasn't just there. It was straining. The connection between his domain and the cleared dungeon had gone from doorway to hose line under full pressure. He could feel the pocket on the other side drawing, drinking, hauling the boss kill home through him like he was a bad section of pipe. He lurched toward the service corridor and made the door on a blank maintenance wall by force of will more than grace. The metal slab appeared shaking. Not physically. Ontologically. The frame hummed with blue-white lines. Drew grabbed the handle and all but fell through. The pocket hit him like a lungful of cold concrete. Mina was already on her feet by the break table, one hand on the wall, face tight with pain and alarm. What happened? Drew tried to answer. What came out was too much. Then the domain breathed. The whole pocket took one deep inward pull that sucked the tarp partition sideways, rattled the break table, and nearly took Drew off his feet again. The grey sky above darkened and lifted at the same time. Steel columns rang. The small yard beyond the retaining wall lengthened by several feet in a single smooth, impossible motion, as if the slab had been poured on a conveyor belt and somebody had finally turned it back on. UI panels cascaded around him. Domain overcapacity. Forced structural resolution. Warning, user model WLL guide growth. Comment, try not to build something stupid. Drew braced both hands on the break table and closed his eyes. He knew this feeling now. Not the magic. The problem. Too much load on a structure that wasn't framed for it. Only this time, the structure was his. He felt the domain asking the same question every job site asked when materials showed up all at once and the original plan wasn't enough anymore. Where does the weight go? Load paths. Anchors. Storage before clutter. Shelter before comfort. He thought of material yards, temporary bracing, covered space for vulnerable supplies, clean lanes through clutter so nobody got killed carrying the wrong thing in the dark. The pocket obeyed. The retaining walls at the edge of the yard rose from knee-high to waist-high poured concrete, capped smooth and square. The open yard extended again, revealing more packed grey ground and a hard path lane leading from the freestanding door opening to the break area. The break area itself enclosed. Not fully, but enough to matter. Stud walls completed on two sides. A corrugated metal roof panelled over the cot and table. The break area sign reappeared bolted over an actual opening like the pocket had finally admitted rooms were useful if people bled in them. Along the far wall of the new yard, vertical steel racks formed from blue-white lines and resolved into real metal uprights with empty shelves. Not a workshop. Not yet. Just the beginning of one. The idea of order waiting for tools. Mina grabbed the cot frame as the slab rolled under her boots once more. Drew. He opened his eyes. The blue-white flow hadn't stopped. The dungeon was still dumping into him through the anchor. Condensed drops, actual stable ones now, began popping into existence over the break table and clattering down like glass marbles shot out of the dark. One larger lump of blue-white mineral matter hit the concrete near his boot and stayed lit from within like trapped rail lightning. Dungeon clear, reward transfer. Condensed mana drop X6. Platform core X1. Material stability, good. The foreman sounded, almost offended by the generosity. Public transit finally paid out. The next pulse was worse. Drew's knees buckled. Mana slammed through his chest and out into the domain hard enough to steal sound for a second. His vision narrowed to a tunnel with Mina at the far end and the break table too far away, and the whole pocket expanding around him like a held breath finally released. He would have gone face first into the concrete if Mina hadn't moved. Injured ribs and all, she got one hand under his shoulder and drove him sideways onto the cot. "Stay with me," she snapped. Drew laughed weakly, because apparently EMT voice worked in all realities. Mina slapped an electrolyte packet into his hand, then thought better of it and tore it open herself with her teeth. "Drink." He did, because she sounded like someone who would drag him back from death, just to lecture him after. The foreman UI hovered over them in aggressive red. User condition overloaded. Mana shock likely. Domain still, ISOLVING. Comment, don't pass out. I refuse to file this. Drew swallowed the foul, warm electrolyte mix and forced himself to sit up. The domain was settling now. Not stable yet, but settling. The low hum in the steel columns had changed pitch from strain to load-bearing acceptance. The grey sky sat higher. The yard outside the break area looked like a small materials bay now, with enough room for stacked supplies, movement lanes, and maybe later, something better than tarps and luck. He pulled up the domain panel with shaking fingers. Domain. Rank E. Size 22mx 18mx6m. Stability moderate under active load. Domain mana 7680. Upkeep elevated. New growth paths available soon. Drew stared at the numbers through a film of sweat. 80 capacity. From 40. That was real. That was leverage. That was also probably the exact amount of power it would now take to keep the whole place from doing something creative and lethal if he got lazy. Mina followed his gaze and let out a low breath. You fed it a lot. Boss, Drew managed. No kidding. He looked at the 6 condensed mana drops on the table and the larger platform core glowing like a trapped station lamp. Then he looked at the still-open pocket door at the far side of the yard. Beyond it, the service corridor wall wasn't steady. Blue-white pressure arced along the frame. The cleared dungeon was still attached, still venting, still not done being dangerous. Mina saw his attention shift. Close it. Drew tried. He reached for the anchor with will. The door shuddered, but didn't vanish. The UI flashed. Warning. Instance collapse not complete. Anchor detachment resisted. Note, finish your job. Drew made a tired, hateful sound. Of course. Of course, the first dungeon didn't just die politely and let him go home. He sat there breathing hard while the pockets settled around him, listening to the hum of new steel and the distant wrong pressure through the door. Mina leaned back against the new framed wall, pale but steady. What does that mean? Drew looked at the flickering doorframe. Means it isn't done with me. Mina closed her eyes once, then opened them again. Then next time you don't come back half-dead before the cleanup. The foreman chimed in. Post-clear spatial pattern recorded. New dimensional adaptation, NEAR threshold. Comment, OH, now we're GTTING fancy. Drew stared at the line. Then at the still flickering door. Then at the platform core on the floor by his boot, glowing like a problem too useful to ignore. He didn't like thresholds. Thresholds were where structures failed or held, where jobs became accidents, where lives changed because one load-bearing part went at the wrong moment. He was still sweating off the boss kill when he realized the next chapter of the job wasn't rest. It was cleanup. And cleanup, in Drew's experience, was where people got hurt because they thought the dangerous part had already happened. Chapter 29, Skill Unlock, Dimensional Step. Drew waited 2 hours. Not because he wanted to. Because Mina made him. She took one look at his pupils, made him drink another bottle of water with electrolyte powder, then told him in the same voice she'd probably used on stubborn drunk patients and fresh EMT trainees alike that if he re-entered a collapsing dungeon while his hands were still shaking, she'd come back from the dead just to hit him with his own crowbar. Drew believed her. So he sat on the break cot under the new corrugated roof, watched the pocket's expanded yard hum with stored pressure, and let his mana crawl upward while the platform core lit the break table from one side like a small captured moon. The 6 condensed mana drops sat in a neat row beside it. Drew had lined them up without thinking. That bothered him. The foreman noticed. Comment, organized loot. He's EVOLVING. By the time his mana bar refilled and the tremor left his fingers, the pocket door was still flickering at the far side of the yard. Less violently now, but still open to the unfinished job. Mina was sitting up on the cot when he stood. You're going back. Briefly. She looked at him over clasped hands. That word never means anything good. Drew checked the bandage on his shoulder where the butcher had clipped him, adjusted the hatchet on his belt, and said the ugliest, honest thing he had. If that tether snaps wrong, it could hit the pocket. Mina's expression changed immediately. From disapproval to calculation. Then brief means brief, she said. In and out, no sightseeing, no greed. Drew's eyes flicked to the row of glowing drops. Mina followed the look and added, limited greed. That got a tired huff out of him. The foreman floated over the break table. Note, the medic is now your supervisor. Comment, frankly, an upgrade. Drew opened the door and went back into the service corridor. The station had changed again. Boss pressure was gone. What remained felt like a construction site after a controlled demolition. Dust in the air, structures half committed to staying up, every surface waiting to decide whether gravity still had the contract. The blue-white shimmer coating the walls had thinned. The station announcement system had finally shut up. Somewhere deep below, metal popped and settled in irregular bursts. Drew moved fast. He hit the platform first, because if anything useful was going to persist after a clear, it would be down there. The butcher's remains were gone. No body. Just scrape marks, broken tile, a couple detached hook fragments, and 3 more condensed mana drops lodged in the edge warning strip near the tracks like bright dew that had chosen concrete instead of grass. Drew collected them. Condensed mana drop X3. The platform butcher's dead rail clock face sat cracked beside the far pillar, dark now, stripped of mana, and suddenly just trash. That felt right. Not everything became relics. Sometimes it just went back to being junk once the power left. He turned to leave and froze. Voices. Not station voices. Human ones. Echoing from the upper stairs. Wardens. Drew killed his chem light instantly and slipped behind a pillar. The voices got clearer. Team 2, hold the mouth. Vale wants confirmation of clear conditions. Watch the rails. Don't touch any active drops barehanded. Drew's jaw tightened. Of course they'd come the minute the entrance stopped eating people fast enough to make them hesitate. A flashlight beam, real or at least enforced enough to matter, cut across the concourse above. Drew looked toward the service corridor and felt his stomach sink. The safest route back to his pocket anchor required crossing the maintenance walkway over the near-track bed. During the boss fight, that walkway had been fine. Now half of it was gone. Not collapsed. Folded. The station floor between platform and service alcove had developed a clean offset 6 feet wide and 4 feet deep, as if reality had misaligned the tile layer and never corrected it. Blue-white pressure shimmered inside the gap. Not something you stepped through unless you wanted to find out what between felt like. The foreman surfaced at the edge of his vision. Spatial shear pocket. Comment, yeah, don't jump in that. Above, Warden boots started down the platform stairs. Drew had seconds. He looked at the gap. At the service alcove beyond it. At the pocket anchor tugging from just past reach. Distance stopped feeling like distance. That was the strangest part. The 6 feet of open wrongness between him and the alcove didn't feel fixed anymore. Not with all the dungeon collapse residue still in the air. Not with the boss kill still echoing in his skills. Not with his will tuned bloody and sharp against folded space. For one sick, perfect heartbeat, it felt like a tape measure in his hand. Not extended. Folded. Ready to snap straight if he wanted it badly enough. The UI detonated into clarity. Skill unlocked. Dimensional step, rank E. Fold short local space and relocate a long line of intent. Cost, mana plus orientation. Comment, running away with style. Drew almost laughed. Instead, he took one breath, fixed his eyes on the service alcove floor, and meant there. The world pinched. Not opened. Pinched, folded, inverted. His stomach stayed where it was for a fraction of a second, while the rest of him did not. Then concrete hit his boots. Hard. He stumbled into the service alcove wall, shoulder first, and caught himself with one palm slapped against cinder block. Behind him, the 6-foot gap remained exactly where it had been. Drew stared, then swore quietly. The foreman sounded delighted. Oh, this is terrible for your decision-making. Warden flashlight beams swept across the platform he'd just left. One of the patrols stopped. Movement. Drew didn't wait for more. He yanked the pocket door open inside the alcove, then hesitated. Because if he just left now, the warden team would search the corridor, find the weird fold, maybe find the alcove, maybe find signs of a second route. He needed them, looking the wrong way. So he did something reckless and annoyingly smart. He stepped back out onto the corridor side, grabbed a loose metal maintenance panel off the wall, and hurled it down the far end of the platform. The clang echoed huge in the quiet station. 3 flashlight beams swung toward the sound instantly. Go. Drew Dimensional stepped again. This time only about 4 meters, across the hall into deeper shadow near the stairwell landing. The sensation hit uglier now that he expected it. Less shock, more disorientation. His inner ear lost the vote for a second. He lurched sideways, one hand grabbing the rail before he ate tile. Mana, 2020, right arrow 1620. Note, you cannot teleport drunk and expect great results. Warden voices shouted down platform. Boots thundered the wrong direction. Drew used the opening. He took the service stair 2 at a time, slower than fear wanted and faster than prudence liked, tracking the pocket anchor through the wall as a solid knot of rightness in the wrong geometry. At the upper landing, he heard another set of boots from above. Wardens covering exits. Fine. He had a new exit. The maintenance gate at the top of the stairwell opened onto the alley behind the station, but the final turn in the corridor had folded too. The hall kinked left into itself, leaving a slab of tiled wall where open air should have been. Spatial shear again. No time to test if it was temporary. Drew eyed the line where the wall met the floor, felt the anchor on the other side through stretched space, and made the call. Not through solid matter. Around it. One short fold. He stepped. The corridor pinched. He came out in the alley behind the station, with one knee almost buckling under him and the taste of pennies flooding his mouth. The maintenance gate banged on its hinges behind him. From the front block, warden voices rose sharper, organized now. A command tone. Drew started moving. Not sprinting. Sprinting attracted eyes. Fast enough. The alley ran behind a row of shuttered storefronts and out toward a service lane. Halfway down, a warden patrol rounded the corner from the street. 2 uniforms and Lieutenant Vale herself, shield patch bright on her sleeve, pistol low but ready. Vale saw him immediately. Of course she did. Drew was a sweaty maintenance guy with a crowbar, dust all over his jacket, and the expression of a man leaving a place he absolutely should not have been. Her gaze dropped once to the glowing edge of a condensed mana drop visible through the half-zipped pocket of his pack. Then back to his face. "Mr. Harker," she said. Not surprised. Confirmed. Drew felt every muscle in his body prepare for something stupid. Vale's eyes narrowed slightly. Funny place to be. City's full of those lately, Drew said. One of the wardens to her right lifted his hooked humming staff. New tip on it since the first one got eaten. Not quite threatening. Not friendly either. Vale's attention shifted to the alley behind Drew, where her other team was still shouting from inside the station. Then back to him. Calculation. Classification. Ownership trying on options. She opened her mouth. Drew did not wait to hear the recruitment pitch. He dimensional stepped sideways into the mouth of a loading bay 3 meters offline. Not far. Just far enough to break their first shot and their first certainty. The world folded, his stomach dropped, and he hit concrete in shadow with a grunt. By the time Vale's people rounded on the new angle, Drew had already thrown the pocket door up against a corrugated metal wall and slipped through. He shut it behind him with his back against the steel and stood there in the pocket yard, breathing hard enough to hurt. Mina looked up from the cot, took one look at his face and said, "That went badly." Drew laughed once and slid down the wall to sit on the concrete. Depends who you ask. The foreman hovered over him like a clipboard angel of poor choices. Skill confirmed. Dimensional step. Comment, for when walking is too honest. Mina eyed the still glowing condensed mana drops on the break table, then the expanded yard, then Drew's face. You got out. Yeah. You look seasick. Also, yeah. He held up one hand and opened the status panel. User Drew HRKR. Level 11. SDR 9. End 10. AGI 7. Will 12. Per 8. Mana 1222. Skills. Pocket Domain, rank E. Void Spall, rank D. Spatial Sense, rank F. Domain Reinforce, rank F. Dimensional Step, rank E. Mina leaned forward, slightly despite her ribs. Show me. Drew frowned. Now. Yes, now. Before you decide the range is a lot, and get yourself cut in half later. That sounded enough, like solid advice, that he obeyed. He stood, picked a point between two steel columns in the yard about 5 meters away, and stepped. The pocket folded more easily than the collapsing station had. He blinked from one spot to the other in a clean, short skip that still made his inner ear protest, but didn't turn his stomach inside out. He staggered once, caught a column, and stayed upright. Mana 1222, right arrow 1022. The foreman made a satisfied noise. See, running away with style. Mina watched him closely. Line of sight. Seems like it. Can you take weight? Drew looked at the crowbar still in his hand, the pack on his shoulders. Some. Can you do it through walls? He looked at the corrugated break wall, thought about Vale's face, and decided against learning the answer the stupid way. Not today. Mina nodded, accepting that. Then her expression sharpened. Who saw? Drew leaned back against the column and looked toward the closed pocket door. Vale. That landed. Mina sat very still for a second. Then they know you're more than a scavenger. Drew thought of the red wristbands at the schoolyard, the buses, the smiling registration language, the way Vale had said his name like a file being updated. Yeah, he said. Outside the pocket, through stone, drywall, and folded space, he could feel the city changing shape around power. The subway mouth had cleared, but not quietly. Loot had come out. Wardens had seen enough. And Drew had just vanished in front of people who liked to catalogue useful things. He went to the break table, drew a new line on the city map from the station to his block, and circled it once. Not route. Attention. The foreman floated beside him, unusually quiet for half a heartbeat. Then it said, they're going to want registration. Drew tightened his grip on the pencil until the wood creaked. Then they can want. Because want, he was learning, was cheap. Ownership was the expensive part. And he was finally getting strong enough to send the bill.
Thanks for watching Echo Forge. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe so the next tale finds you. Share this with someone who loves dark fantasy or twisted sci-fi, and I'll see you in the next world.